Now, please welcome the right people.
Welcome to a Sunday afternoon in Lincolnville, where the right people and Mama Blue will entertain you. My name is Lee Weaver, and I have the privilege of serving as your Master of Ceremonies for this splendid event. And now, the right people, who are a bright band of writers who meet monthly and share with each other their compositions of poetry and prose, fiction and nonfiction. Our first contributor to this, a Sunday afternoon in Lincolnville, is Dee Israel. But most importantly for us today, a Sunday afternoon in Lincolnville is her baby, her brainchild, her idea. We are here today because of her vision for this event. Dr. Dee Israel.
It's so nice to see so many friends I haven't seen in a long time and to meet some new friends. As Lee said, I'm not from St. Augustine, but I came here over 20 years ago with my husband, Rudolph Israel, who was from Lincolnville, and we would sit around in the evening with his friends, and they would talk about their life growing up here. It was an eye-opener for me. The tales were experiences that led you to tears as well as to laughter. So I thought this afternoon I'd share just a little bit of what I have learned throughout the years. And let's start with the 19th century. I would like to go back. It was 1866. It was the time that Africans migrated from North St. Augustine around Fort Mose and located themselves in this community. It was a beautiful community at the time with luscious orange grove plantations, and lived here. They called the community Little Africa, and later changed the name to Lincolnville because of the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln. So this was the beginning of a rich culture in St. Augustine. So let's move on to the early part of the 20th century. I call a vibrant community. It was independent, but segregated. It was time of great accomplishments in the area. Restaurants flourished. Cora Tyson had a restaurant called the Savoy. The Iceberg, everyone talks about, was a well-known store that sold the best ice cream in town. Education was of high quality in this very building. Teachers taught a liberal arts education and mentored students, white patients. And Dr. Daniel Roberts, he treated patients during the flu epidemic of 1918 and never lost a patient. So let's move on to the middle 20th century. I call it a period of pain and promise. It was during the 1960s of the civil rights struggle. It was a time of turmoil and protest in Lincolnville. The churches such as St. Paul and St. Mary's played an important role in the training and support of the protesters. The protest here and in other cities in America was an impetus for President Lyndon Johnson to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So I want to leave you with 2 points that I think is important today in saying that it's the reverse of Lincolnville. The first is, these new families that moved in did not view this community as us and them, as has happened in other communities. Rather, they saw the Lincolnville community as we. Secondly, this institution, as Gail has mentioned, has assumed a major role in educating students when it was Excelsior, and now it is a museum that exhibits a photographic view of the leaders of the past, the fingerprints of Dr. King when he was arrested, the piano of Ray Charles, and other significant momentum. This benefit is to ensure the continuation of the museum in order to preserve, expand, and promote the arts in all of its forms, not only in St. Augustine, but throughout the country. We, as an African-American people, came from Africa to Spain, to St. Augustine, and it has been a tremendous journey. Thank you.
Is Richard Burr, originally from Massachusetts. He has published 2 books and is currently working on a third, a historical work of fiction called Jersey. He opened his photography business 2 years ago, and we will see some of his work product now. Please, Richard Burr.
And so on, but any discussion that we have about St. Augustine is incomplete without discussing Lincolnville as well. Because right here, all of you are sitting on ground zero of a large battle that was fought for the hearts and minds of the world by just a very few very brave individuals. First things I found, I think this is on South Street if I remember right, was this nice beautiful sign welcoming the visitors to Lincolnville. And so they finished construction of this building in 1925, which was the same year that construction began on the Bridge of Lions. It was, of course, an all-black school. It was called originally School Number 2. Yeah, it was also called Colored School. And eventually it became known as Excelsior. The first house that I photographed was owned by a family called the Whites. They were a family of civil rights demonstrators who had a son named Samuel. Now, those of you familiar with the history here realize that Samuel, along with 3 friends who are known as the St. Augustine Four. Okay, this is the home of Nurse Janie Price. Now, Dr. King and Reverend Ralph Abernathy stayed there, and they were arrested the next day for their peaceful protesting, again at the Matsumoto Lodge. This is St. Cyprian's Episcopal Church. I have a fair number of church photos in here, and I did that because a lot of history happened in the churches. This was founded in the 1980s for African Americans with no other place in St. Augustine to worship in the Episcopal Church tradition. This house I love. It's fascinating history here because right here we have a building that housed both sides of the civil rights conflict. First there was a Judge Fabasinski who fought to preserve segregation, and he fought hard. And then later, about 50 years later, it was owned by Dr. Robert Haling, who fought to end it. All in the same house. Bethel Baptist Church was a meeting place for the NAACP Youth Council. This is one of the oldest surviving buildings in Lincolnville. It's a residence of Reverend Thomas Wright, who was a former president of the St. Augustine NAACP. This building was the Florida state headquarters of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Right here on the street, St. Benedict de Moors Catholic Church. Now, this church was the cornerstone of African American history. And we have the St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal, or AME, Church. Mass meetings were held here, and among the speakers, of course, were Dr. King, Reverend Abernathy. This is the First Baptist Church. They held mass meetings here, and it was dubbed the cradle of the civil rights movement in St. Augustine. Okay, Trinity United Methodist Church, built over a century ago. Now we're amazed at that because it's a very pretty building. That is the St. Mary's Missionary Baptist Church, the beginning of many of the marches in the 60s. James Reddick was a longtime principal of the school, Excelsior. And he also edited the first black newspaper in the St. Augustine Post. Street. Trees don't belong in the middle of the street. But I loved it because the tree is alive, it's vibrant, it's growing, it's fighting for the right to live and to grow. As though it's saying, I have a right to live here. And nothing, in my opinion, nothing is more symbolic of the civil rights movement. Thank you.
Lenny Kaltenecker, who grew up in the Netherlands and came to America as a nurse in 1961, I believe, where in Chicago she met her husband-to-be, they married, and she stayed. She was one of the earliest, i.e. founding members of the St. Augustine Ancient Poets Society celebration. She has been published in many anthologies. Please welcome Lenny Kaltenecker.
I wrote a poem and I called it The Middle Passage, and it brings you back to the time when the African people were brought here. I used the name Abina to tell my story. Abina was running fast, the baby on her hip last. Away from her village, away from it all. Did not want to go on a ship so small. Did not want to go over the endless sea, not knowing where she would be. She heard the steps closer, right behind. Looked for a place where they would not find her and the child. But the land was too wild, there's no place to hide. She awoke in the midst of her people, all shackled at the bottom of the ship, her baby no longer tied to her hip. As she listened, it became clear. They all had been taken away from their place, having no idea what they would face. Abina cried for her baby, her parents as well. Where they were going, no one would tell. Storms came at sea, danced the ship up and down. They all were sure they would drown. For weeks they were laying in the stench, being sick. Sick of worry, sick of fright, not knowing what might be their lot at the end of each night. Occasionally they were allowed on deck, saw other ships making this trek. Finally, in the distance, a speck of land, becoming closer as days went by. The word went around, it was Florida, for which they were bound. Soon they walked on solid ground. It was good not to be on the ship anymore, but they were brought to the market, as many before. They stood there like cattle, feet and hands tied, examined by people who looked white. So too Abina, who was pretty and bold. Soon she went off with a man and his wife. That is how Abina started her American life. The black workers were handy and smart. That is also how St. Augustine got its start. Right here, on the plaza, at the slave mart. Thank you.
Born in Jacksonville, a retired teacher in language and arts, a writer of what is called flash fiction. She describes her writing style as folksy redneck. And I would add, with a wonderful, humorous twinkle in her pen. She is a published writer. And
thank you very much for coming. We all know, living here, we've been through all of history. When the Pilgrims landed 1620, we were already here. And right through the tragic Civil War, that was 1860, and then to the two World Wars, and the awful, the Great Depression, and through Martin Luther King time, all of it, we've been here all along, and so I thought it would be fun to see if I could catch some of you. I gathered up just some questions of history to see if you can guess true or false if you're brave enough. First question. In the 1920s, Lincolnville's locally known photographer was Henry Twine. How many say true? True. Well, close. It wasn't Henry Twine, it was Richard. Anyway, back in the heydays, about the 20s, the Palace Market was located on Washington Street. Is that true? Yes, it is true. Okay, the Iceberg was the name of an ice cream shop in Lincolnville that survived the Great Depression. Is that true? True. Yeah. Lincolnville began as a settlement of freed black slaves back in 1846. Is that true? No. Yeah, it's false because it was after the war, 1865. Okay, in 1830, which was before the Civil War, St. Augustine was 30% black and also unsegregated, scattered throughout the town. Is this true? True. Mm-hmm. It is true. Famous singer Ray Charles attended our school for the deaf and blind. Our favorite son, that's right. Lincolnville used to be a plantation that grew mostly indigo. Yeah. Oh, what was the product? Orange. Yeah, it was a great big orange plantation. Yeah. But, we were so lucky. I remember when I first moved here, I couldn't believe it. This had been a small town for 435 years. So we had it a long time. They don't know. And after that, we've seen what happens now, the big boom. So we just have to look for the good and be good sports about it.
Thank you. I'm an actor and a playwright. The name of my piece is Royalty in St. Augustine. Friday, September 18th, 2015, Spanish royalty, King Philip VI and Queen Letizia of Spain visited our ancient city. 4 big black SUVs delivered them and their entourage to the Castillo. People cheered. An honor guard of appropriately attired reenactors lined their walkway. Cannons roared their welcome. St. Augustine dignitaries greeted them. Thousands of spectators held red carnations in their honor. Later in the day, the king and queen stood on the king's balcony of our government house. He addressed the throng. They cheered and applauded his remarks. The Spanish royalty then received a private tour of the cathedral basilica where they rang the church's 4 facade bells dedicated to the Spanish royalty by the Diocese of St. Augustine. A grand dinner fit for a king with international and local leaders followed at Flagler College. Spanish royalty was in our beloved city for just one day. Before dinner, he remarked that he and the Queen would leave our city reluctantly because they had such a good time in St. Augustine. Same day, 5:45 p.m. with no attendants, announcing his arrival and driving his own red Chevrolet Impala. St. Augustine royalty. Dr. Robert B. Haley, father of the St. Augustine Civil Rights Movement, arrived in Lincolnville. Early 1963, beaten into unconsciousness, 11 teeth knocked out, his hand crushed so that dentistry would be problematic, stacked as firewood along with James Jackson and James Hauser and Clyde Jenkins to be burned alive by the Klan, rescued at the last minute, ridiculously charged by the authorities with assaulting a mob of 200. Ridiculous charges dismissed. 14 days in the hospital. Dr. Robert B. Hailing, a giant, a hero, a model, an NAACP powerhouse of recruitment, an extraordinarily courageous man of moral strength, dedicated to equality and justice and freedom for all. He arrived at the Accord Civil Rights Museum in Lincolnville, once the dental office of Dr. Hailing, his dental office. We cheered him. We sang songs from the movement. We prayed and dedicated ourselves anew. We listened to him humbly speak of the past, the present, and of course of the future, and we cheered his motto, never give up. His words, interrupted many times by our applause, moved us. 100 respectful spectators, teary-eyed as together, with hands joined, we sang, "We Shall Overcome." We knew we were in the presence of royalty. We dined on hamburgers and chips and soda and sweets, a grand dinner fit for a king, a fitting banquet and conclusion to a remarkable day. It was such a good time in St. Augustine, when St. Augustine royalty, Dr. Robert B. Hailing, returned to our remarkably historic St. Augustine, returned to our remarkable Lincolnville, where we promise we will never give up. Thank you. The right people are very glad that you came out on this Sunday afternoon in Lincolnville to hear their written offerings, or perhaps, just perhaps, you're willing to sit through our writings in order that you might see and hear one and only, without further ado, Mama Blue.
Today, however, I get the honor to say some of my music for you all. I want to introduce my guitar player, Mr. Jim Rose. We wrote this song together. The name of it is Closer to Free. Lie to myself, I lied to you. Been running around here since the days of my youth. Worked hard to get lost, yeah, running from the truth. I cried and prayed those countless days that the sorrow would end tomorrow. I'd be free, yes, I'd be free. I was strung out, broke down. This next song is called Tired. I'm tired, selling and giving in to anyone who has loved me. Tired of all the off your charity. Tired of all the shades of gray. Hey, mama needs a little clarity. I'm tired. But don't feel sorry for me, my lone's my own. My back is strong. Don't worry about me. Then I'm tired of being looked at and being asked, baby, do you need a friend? Tired, I don't want you naked, just something about the arms of a man. Said I'm tired, that the only one I love is gonna want me. No, no, no. My load's my own, my back is strong. Don't worry about me. Oh, don't you worry.